This video contains discussions of dead bodies and adjacently gross subjects, so if you are sensitive to these said topics, I'd recommend sitting this one out and coming back another time. Cheers!
Video games are violent. I'm not blowing any minds by acknowledging this fact. From the very beginning of the medium, we have been blowing up spaceships, shooting guns, and eating ghosts. And the claim that video games make children violent has haunted the gaming community from as far back as the 80s. Some of the most influential titles that are now considered without a debate classics, such as Doom and Mortal Kombat, are what I see in my mind's eye when I think of the word violence. Killing has become something so intrinsic to the medium itself that it's become hard to imagine what video games would have been like without the said act. I have been playing Doom recently. I downloaded Doom a while back after I watched the Tim Rogers Action Button review of it that's longer than both The Godfather Part 2 and Seven Samurai, two among my top favorite films of all time. Doom is good. It's very fun to play. After a certain point, especially when you replay already played maps, you find yourself in a flow state as you commit homicide in rhythm with its iconic music. Darting through the retro-futuristic military and science facilities, slowly devouring the whole map of enemies in one fell swoop evokes within me a kind of euphoria I simply cannot explain. But among a lot of things peculiar to Doom's design, one that I always found weird was the fact that the bodies of the enemies after they are killed always face the player. Doom, of course, uses two-dimensional sprites for its characters and assets. The enemies before death have unique and distinct sprites for their front, back, and both the sides. When you enter a room, you can tell an enemy is chilling out and patrolling and not looking at you due to the said fact. However, I've always found it very peculiar that once killed, there is only a single sprite of their dead body that always stays the same, no matter where you look at it from. As if somehow the game is always reminding you that you have turned these once living beings that had multiple complex sprites according to where you look at them from, that had given them a feeling of 3 dimensions, into these 2-dimensional PNGs that only exist to be perceived by you. Quote, "If only you could talk to these creatures, then perhaps you could try and make friends with them, form alliances. Now, that would be interesting," is an infamous remark found in Edge magazine's review of Doom back in April 1997. It remains a notorious statement in the gaming community, and the aforementioned Tim Rogers video also brings it up to a little more than a brief extent. Keeping aside its utter ridiculousness and buzzkill nature, it is an interesting thing to write out, especially considering the modern development of video games into the violence-ridden medium it has become. The aforementioned aspect of Doom's design, the creatures turning into singular flat 2-dimensional sprites that follow the player's gaze, unintentionally ends up highlighting the process of objectification that takes place in these video games. Objectification in quite a literal sense here, as you're turning living things inside the narrative of video games into dead bodies, that is, objects for the sake of your own amusement. Sure, those living things could vary from normal civilians to cartoonish monsters to actual monsters. You are, nonetheless, doing what you are doing, which is killing. But I'm not here to question the ethics of killing and violence inside of video games. In fact, this video isn't really even about Doom or its successors. But what this video is about is what is left. What do you do if you aren't the Doom guy flying through military bases with your Gatling gun, but an exploited janitor hired to clean up after him. Enter Viscera Cleanup Detail. Viscera Cleanup Detail is a very funny game. The 2014 release anti-FPS sci-fi horror video game developed by the indie game dev studio RuneStorm puts you in the shoes of a nameless janitor hired by an Aperture from Portal-esque company to basically clean up space staples to the FPS and sci-fi horror genres such as space stations or military bases of varying sizes. I say anti-FPS sci-fi horror not because the game or its developers are against the said genres, but because in design, VCD is very much built like another FPS, while not having the killing mechanic whatsoever. The maps vary in sizes. The smallest one I could think of took me around 45 minutes to complete, while the largest one I've played took around 2 hours. I'm sure there are even longer maps out there. All of them vary in Viscera too, with certain maps only containing blood splatter and 1 or 2 torsos sprinkled with intestines, while others contain what I think are alien innards and secretions. The funny aspect of the game becomes clear as soon as we start to look at the gameplay. You are equipped with a mop with dangly noodles, a tablet that gives you the info you need, and a device a la Silent Hill 2's radio which is used to detect viscera around the place so that you can make sure you didn't miss any spots. Oh, and of course, how could I forget, you have your handy dandy hands. You're given the opportunity to use other items you find while working. The gameplay itself is quite straightforward. You use your hands to telekinetically pick up and drag body parts into these biohazard buckets, which you can then dump into the incinerator. You can use your mop to clean up any blood spills. Only thing you need to be wary of is that your mop gets bloody very quickly, so you need to keep a water bucket by your side at all times. Only that after a while of dipping your mop into the bucket, it too gets contaminated, so you need to carry the said thing to the incinerator as well and get a replacement from this little machine. And of course, while doing any of this, you spill the water, well, good luck, buddy. There are of course other tasks such as repairing bullet holes and getting rid of bullet shells. Well, okay, you probably can't tell why I call this funny from the description I just gave you, and that's because I didn't really mention anything about the physics of the game. For one, your character moves a little too swiftly and smoothly. This adds challenge to when you're carrying a biohazard bucket full of human intestines and you hit a curb and topple all of it, resulting in an even bigger mess than what you started with. Each piece of organic substance creates an exaggerated amount of mess. Even this small, tiny little piece of whatever it is makes a mess large enough to get your mop out and dipping in water before cleaning. The innards feel light while carrying, even though they are rag dolls. Then there's the mop that is used when you press left click. Each click ensues this violent thrust by the janitor, which seems like it should not do anything other than smear the blood wider than it already is. Then there's the fact that you are this nonchalant janitor cleaning away desperate pleas written in blood by the victims before they met their nightmarish gory ends. That is the very core of the hilarity present within this game, a bizarreness that can be felt when something heavy is deprived of all its weight and instead filled with an almost comedic indifference. This said weight, however, is very much real. Often in film and novels, the macabre and the morbid are safely examined and indulged in. I myself have had experiences with people who say that they read or that they like film, only for them to be readers and watchers of crime noir. In fact, the said genre was my personal gateway into the wider sphere of film, just like for a lot of people. Death and murder are both things that we simply can't get enough of. The rise of the true crime genre on the internet stands evidence to this, but rarely ever do we think about what goes on beyond the action itself. I'm not talking about the people affected by the said death, but the mundane and the undramatic and excruciatingly real aspects of it. Not the autopsy or the research of the evidence or the grief, but the cleaning up of the scene where the death or murder took place, the cleaning up of the body before the funeral. These are the tasks that are often overlooked when one thinks of or indulges in the consumption of stories featuring such macabre subjects. As some may know, when a person dies, specifically in a messy way, laymen are not really supposed to clean up the scene, as the organic mess is considered as biohazard, causing many problematic diseases and infections. And of course, the organic mess can be quite a real mess. The human body after death is often described by those who deal with them to melt. The skin developing a slimy texture, the blood inside stopping circulation and causing all sorts of discolorations and all sorts of secretions escaping the cadaver. The folks who were expected to clean all this up used to be the police officers and investigators back before a proper understanding of how the biohazardous material can cause harm was realized. By the 90s, the job was taken up by private companies specializing in cleaning. Of course, they usually never were specifically formed for cleaning up crime scenes, but did other extreme cleaning jobs as well. Nowadays, the so-called crime scene cleaners are well equipped to deal with the viscera they may or may not encounter and are expected to provide a shoulder of support for the families they service. From a couple of interviews I've read and watched in the preparation for this video, it is interesting to observe an archetype of a jaded crime scene cleaner. Clocking into work, wiping brains off the ground, scrubbing bloodstains off the hardwood floor, and hitting the shower right afterwards. Each of them reiterates the same thing, that one cannot possibly do the job without disassociating the fact that what they are erasing is not an accidental coffee spill, but the very final traces of a whole entire person. A person just like them. It is also worth examining this activity through a lens of materialism, as what is happening here is, of course, the exploited laborer exerting his labor power in order to produce a service that reverts the space of a crime to a previous state. You equip your mop and left-click a couple of times. The janitor violently jabs away the blood on the wall that's smeared in a way which forms the final prayers of those whose guts you sweep off the floor. There is a rather peculiar situation that arises with how the crime scene cleanup industry is placed in the current political economy. Just like the old jab made at doctors that being that although doctors treat you back to health, they are also the people benefiting from your misfortune. The same kind of applies to crime scene cleanup companies, doesn't it? Of course, do not take this as me calling the cleaners themselves terrible people for doing what they do, as if it's not them, someone else will, and I'd rather it be the people who know what they're doing. Back during the Second World War, there were specialized units of people selected by the SS to work on concentration camps. They were dubbed the Sonderkommandos, which directly translated to Special Commandos. These people were tasked with many jobs around the killing process. In the Auschwitz killing center, a couple of these Sonderkommandos were tasked with guiding the incoming people through the undressing areas. They'd make small talk with them and reassure them that they'll be safe, after which these Sonderkommandos would lead them to their demise. After the gassing, another group was to untangle the dead bodies, get them out of the chamber, and clean the chamber for the very next batch. The bodies were taken to yet another group of Sonderkommandos who would shave hair off them and snatch any jewelry or anything of value. Afterwards, a final group of the Sonderkommandos would operate the crematorium and then dump the ashes in a pit afterwards. Of course, I don't think any of this information has shocked you, for the atrocities of the Holocaust is, rightfully so, well known about today. But for those of you who did not know, the Sonderkommandos weren't Nazi officers, but were mostly made up of Jewish prisoners themselves. They would be coerced into carrying out the work by the threat of death or torture. No, they knew that even if they complied, they would be killed anyhow. They did so in the hope that perhaps, in doing so, they could live just a little longer. Just long enough, perhaps. There are many accounts of how, while on duty, these Sonderkommandos would recognize someone in one of the batches, a relative, a sibling, a parent, or a spouse. They'd then have to decide on whether to let the person know of what awaits them or lie. Regardless of which they chose, they knew the outcome would be the same. To state the obvious, this is monstrous, and I wouldn't wish this upon anyone. For what it is that these Sonderkommandos were basically being forced to objectify, to otherize their fellow compatriots, and by extension, their own eventual ends. The human body, the idle, dead human body, is after all of our inevitable conclusions. It is very much a part of ourselves, as the end is contained within life itself. And by being forced to work on these bodies, we objectify a part of ourselves, an action that leaves deep psychological distresses upon the subjects. Quote, I have gathered proof of the company's crimes. Aerospace Sanitation Inc. have ties with every illegal operation and installation in the galaxy. I have been sanctioned to clean up 471 ungodly disasters over the last 36 years, always under complete secrecy. I was there for the Aegis 7 incident, when the whole thing was covered up. They must be exposed. Their duplicity with shadow organizations is beyond measure. They have silenced at least 27 of their employees in the past 20 years. Now, it seems I too will pass into legend. Although there is no real overarching plot in the game, there are certain aspects that recur, such as the company's name, providing us with a proper universe that the game is set in. Another example of the same are these notes we find throughout the game. These are the notes left by Bob, a janitor hired by the company just like us. Bob has left a total of 12 notes throughout the game, which you can collect and put in your janitor utility box to finally find Bob, or at least find Bob's body. Bob is a monstrous person, confessing to killing multiple people in order to cover his tracks as he is hiding from the company while he writes these notes. But through Bob, a story echoing that of the Sonderkommandos can be put together. Of course, Sonderkommandos were real people who really suffered. I don't want to equate funny video game haha ragdoll to one of the most notorious events in the history of the human race. That is not what I'm doing. Under the modern day political economy, you need to work. You need to sell your labor power in order to afford subsistence. And if you happen to be born into a wealthier family, you may be able to afford a little more than that. Hooray, good for you. The idea that we choose to participate in this system is one that has been prevalent all throughout the 200 years that capitalism has existed.
If you hate it so much, why are you a part of it?
Under capitalism, it is the free will of the individual, isn't it? You can do whatever you want to do, and hence you build yourself up by choosing. Or at least this is what the ideology states. But as my favorite erratic Slovenian and his predecessors have pointed out, it is not the lack of choice that we are unfree due to, but because of the lack of choice of how the choices are presented to us. In other words, we are not free to not participate, to not choose. It is not the content we have a problem with, but how the content is presented to us, that is, the form. If you see problems with the system, well, too bad. Either get with it or starve to death. In other words, the jobs we do take up, can we really say we chose? And if we can't, then is it too far off to say that crime scene cleanup echoes the jobs of the Sonderkommandos? Again, I'm not saying your boss is an embodiment of the SS or that you're equal to the Sonderkommando in suffering when you go to work every day. Instead, what I am saying is that crime scene cleanup under neoliberal capitalism is akin to that of Sonderkommandos in that both are forced labor. Forced, literally in the case of Sonderkommandos, and for the former, ideologically. The problem with forcing of a job such as this is that with labor under capitalism comes alienation. Marx broadly posits four kinds of alienation. The alienation from nature, as while at work, nature has become nothing more than a dead resource. Here, however, there is a new dimension added as the components of the janitor's labor is death and dead human bodies, which are, dialectically speaking, a part of himself as well. We are alienated from our labor as we no longer own what we produce. The janitor is nameless and faceless. Thinking back in terms of the maps in the game as maps for other sci-fi shooter games, the janitor's work is nothing more than a reloading of the map. The map is cleaned and then reinstated to a previous state so that all the carnage can happen again. And the reloading itself happens underneath the brand of the company the janitor works for. We are alienated from each other, as under capitalism, we are always competing. This can be somewhat seen with Bob and how he kills his co-workers to save his own skin, something that he confesses to in his notes. And also, since the janitor's job is working on other humans under capitalism, he is alienated from them too, as he is objectifying them and hence otherizing. We are also alienated from ourselves, as under capitalism, we are simply a cog in a larger system. We don't feel important, nor are we really. If it were not us, it would be someone else. And yet, again, the very same applies to the janitor. Of course, everything I've described thus far is not even touching the tip of the iceberg, as Marx's theory is one that spans ever wider than how much it is often read. I implore you to do your own research. But perhaps it is this deep sense of alienation that is felt while playing this game. A sense of dejected irony, a bit of melancholic unease, and total burnout. Just like in Doom, the act of killing has left what were once people who were three-dimensional complex beings as rubbery and obnoxious ragdolls. But it is still productive to keep in mind that the Sonderkommandos, regardless of the pathos, did partake in revolts. On October 1944, there was a very significant armed revolt carried out by them. Other forms of revolts occurred regularly all around the place, although, again, never functioning into anything other than sparks. Bob's story, no matter how monstrous and futile, is still rather hopeful. It's like in one of the ending chapters of 1984. Quote, "If you want a picture of the future, imagine a boot stamping on a human face forever. But it is only made eternal by the fact that we fight back, isn't it? If the human face gave up and just squashed into nothingness, then why is the boot still stamping forever?"
Thank you very much for watching this video. I've noticed an uptick in subscribers and viewers on the channel, and it's very encouraging. Hello and welcome to the channel. Thank you for subscribing. I know it's kind of weird to ask people to subscribe after thanking them for the same, but I gotta get that YouTube red one day, so please do. Subscribe and like and comment. I really mean the last part though. Let me know what you thought about this video. Follow me on Twitter and check out my podcast. All links in the description down below. With that said, Merry Christmas, or Happy Hanukkah, or just Happy New Year. I'll see you on the other side, whatever that means.